Good evening. Thank you all for joining us today on our live discussion of the National Association of Realtors. What are we talking about tonight? We are talking about the settled lawsuit for the National Association of Realtors. So for those of you who have not heard, last week on Friday, there was a massive lawsuit that has been going on for probably about a year now. And the National Association of Realtors finally came to a settlement. The settlement has not been approved yet, but they've got something in writing that we're kind of working off of. And critics of the real estate industry are saying that this is going to completely change the way real estate is done in America. And I think by the end of this live, you'll probably have a decent idea of whether or not that is true. But we really won't know for sure until July when all of this kind of shakes out. If you're watching and you've got comments as we go along or questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the comments. But first of all, I do want to say that we are going to be talking about this lawsuit, but nobody here on this call is an attorney. I'm Ellen Pitts. I'm a realtor here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've also got Liam O'Leary on this call. He's my lead buyer's agent and also a realtor here in North Carolina. How you doing, Liam?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. I've also got Brandon on this call. Brandon Kelly is our preferred mortgage lender, works with a lot of our buyers. And thanks for joining us today, Brandon. How you doing?
Great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. And of course, y'all know Timothy Pitts, the editor. He's going to be running the show from behind the scenes here. All right. So having said all that, we are not attorneys, but we are going to kind of go over what happened, what the news is saying about it. We're going to go over so all these claims made by the media. And let me talk about that really quick, because when I first saw the news on Friday morning, I was completely floored. I was like, wow, this is insane. This is going to completely destroy the process of buying and selling. And not only yeah, realtors will be put out of business, but buyers and sellers are going to be in trouble too, because they actually need us. So I was completely floored by it. But then when I actually read the settlement and what it's actually saying, I realized that a lot of that stuff is simply not true. And I've got examples and data here to show you that's not actually the way it's done. And people are just saying that it is and think that it's done in a particular way, but it's not. So again, we're going to talk about what happened on Friday that got this whole ball rolling. We're talking about the claims that were made by the media. We're going to talk about how commissions really do work in real estate. But keep in mind that all markets are local and all real estate commissions are local. So here in North Carolina, we have specific laws and rules that we have to abide by that people in other states where you may be watching from do not have to abide by. So we really are specifically talking about how real estate works and how commissions work here in North Carolina. We're going to talk about what the media got wrong. We're going to talk about what the settlement actually says. And then we're going to talk about what's likely to be the fallout of all of this. This could go so many different ways. And I've spent the last 5 days just thinking through, all right, well, what if this happened? And what if this happened? And what if this happened? And believe me, I've got 100 different alternate plans for how the real estate business could actually run if this thing, if some of the claims by the news are correct. So, all right, let me start by reading something from the Wall Street Journal. The agreement is the answer to months of uncertainty and mounting legal threats to the residential real estate industry. NAR, one of the nation's most powerful trade groups, has been facing crippling antitrust liability since a Kansas, Missouri jury delivered a $1.8 billion verdict against the organization and 2 national brokerages in October. The jury found that industry rules for how buyers agents are paid were keeping commission rates artificially high. That case and others like it were filed by home sellers who argued they paid inflated costs. So basically, the whole argument here is that the way the real estate industry is designed is not allowing the market to actually control the prices. People are saying with all the technology that has come out, prices should have come down more than they have. And so the real estate industry must be colluding to keep those prices high. And that's what they're saying. We're going to talk about all of that tonight. Brandon, Liam, do either one of you guys want to go first? I want to hear your thoughts on what you've heard so far about what's happened with this lawsuit. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to talk.
Liam, why don't you? I'll let you take the stage first. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. One thing we say a lot is obviously we don't have a crystal ball, so it'll be, I guess, just interesting to see how kind of everything falls into place here. I think there's a lot of confusion about how commissions work to begin with, especially locally. Like Ellen said, every market's a little bit different, so I think understanding where you're buying to is very important in this. But in the end of the day, I think we're going to do the best we can to represent everybody, and I think buyers agents and selling agents are really important. So be interesting to see how things fall.
Brandon, have you heard anything specific that like just shocked you or startled you?
Well, from the loan side, I guess I would say, specifically, nothing's really come out. I haven't heard any banks specifically give any opinion on how that might affect lending. I've actually heard all kinds of opinions on this about in a positive light. Actually, I've heard quite a few in a rather overwhelming light, but I've also heard the inverse. I mean, there's a lot of talk already. I work with a lot of buyers that, it's already pretty thin. There's already not a lot of money there to begin with to get the closing done. So if you're going to throw additional fees in there for the realtor, I mean, that could really make it, very difficult. But as far as what the buzz and what I'm hearing, I mean, I've heard a lot of things. It's a busy time of year, so there's a lot going on for me, but certainly a lot of people are talking, speculating on what this could mean. It seems to be the busiest topic in our industry.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely not heard some things, but read in the actual settlement some things that I'm actually super happy about. I think is actually going to, and potentially could help bring prices down a little bit. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay. So to sum up, NAR has reached a settlement that still has to be approved by the court. That'll result in NAR paying $418 million over a 4-year period and agreeing to certain changes in how the NAR-owned MLS would function. So for those of you who don't understand what that means, the NAR-owned MLS is the multiple listing service is where real estate agents or realtors list all of our homes for sale. And it was designed and funded by the National Association of Realtors. So back before there was an MLS or anything online, there was a multiple listing service, but it was like big notebooks with paper in them. And that translated into what we have right now, the multiple listing service, and it's owned by the National Association of Realtors. So this lawsuit is particularly pertaining to the MLS, not just NAR, but NAR's MLS. Okay, now I'm going to get into the actual meat of the settlement and what it says. Timothy, can you throw those slides up? Okay, so the first thing it says, it's going to eliminate and prohibit any requirement by the National Association of Realtors, Realtor MLSs, or member boards that listing brokers or sellers must make offers of compensation to buyer brokers or other buyer representatives. And it's going to prohibit Realtor MLS participants to make offers of compensation on the MLS to buyer brokers or other buyer representatives. And it will eliminate all broker compensation fields and prohibit the sharing of offers of compensation to buyer brokers or other buyer representatives. And so basically what it's saying is that NAR can't require buyer or sellers to pay the buyer's agent, which is kind of what happens it's not exactly what happens right now. Right now, most sellers decide to pay the buyer's agent. And this is where it's really funny because here in North Carolina, sellers are not required to pay the buyer's agent. And I've got some data that I pulled from the MLS. It's really interesting that they're talking about, like I said earlier, collusion, like fixing prices. But I pulled every active listing from the MLS to show how much buyer compensation sellers are offering in the MLS, and it's all over the place. And some are zero. I mean, there's a decent number of sellers who are offering nothing. They don't have to. I think in some states, maybe they must have to, because otherwise, what's the point of this lawsuit? But I also kind of get the feeling a little bit that it's just people's feeling that, people, not sellers, but just general sentiment that sellers are required to do this. They're not required to do it. In my mind, market forces have led sellers to do this, and that's why it happens. But the lawsuit says that they're not going to be required to.
And it's worth pointing out that this is kind of the section of the settlement that had all of the media kind of up in a storm, basically saying, oh, look at this. Like, we're ending broker cooperation. We're ending compensation for buyers agents. Buyers agents are going to have, or buyers are going to have to pay their own way for their own agents. And it's like, I think a misreading of this is what got a lot of people who wanted to see changes excited. But as we'll talk about throughout the rest of the evening, it doesn't really say what a lot of people thought that said.
Right. Okay. So the next section of this, there's two parts that I've got listed here, and there's one that I actually didn't copy onto here, but I'm just going to say it because it's important. But what it also says is that that NAR cannot agree to create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism for listing brokers or sellers to make offers of compensation to buyer brokers. Okay, so they can't put it in the MLS that sellers are willing to pay buyer brokers a commission, and they also can't make something outside, make a whole nother, structure outside of the MLS saying that they'll pay it. And then it says that Realtor MLS participants displaying both data or data feeds from a Realtor MLS and offers of compensation to buyer brokers or other representatives, but only listings from their own brokerage. So basically they're saying, we can't put this in the MLS. NAR can't create some other website somewhere else where it tells us what the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent commission. But individual brokerages, like our brokerage is Compass can put on their website for their own listings how much the seller is willing to pay to compensate the buyer. So what that could look like is when a buyer wants to know how much is the seller paying any compensation for this, or am I going to have to pay it? We'll just have to go around to the different brokerages and be like, oh, let's look on that on each person's website rather than having it all in one place. So it's just creating a little bit more labor for everybody involved. Anybody want to comment on Liam?
No, I'm a little confused because is this suggesting then that obviously it can't be advertised? So if a buyer wants to make an offer on a property, does that mean that would they be able to contact the listing agent to find out if they're paying?
Well, if they're represented by an agent, their agent would have to contact the listing agent.
Yeah.
So we could, sorry, go ahead, Lydia.
I was going to say some of the confusion I think around this is that, like you said, that people think that there's this flat 6% fee, which is just not true. I mean, last week I was working with an investor who wanted to see a couple of properties, and MLS just put a 0% fee for the buyer's fee. So, I mean, there's a lot of listings right now where the seller is not willing to pay it, where the process involves me reaching out and, first of all, just asking why they're not willing to pay it. Sometimes that can be a red flag of, to me, it's if you have representation on both sides, it's going to be a smoother closing. So why are they not willing to pay it? And then if they're not, is that something that they're willing to put as a credit to get an offer? So it's definitely not something we're not seeing right now. Whether it becomes more prevalent or not, that's up, to see. But as of right now, it's not too much different than what's happening already.
Right.
Ellen, am I misunderstanding this then? Does that mean that they would no longer advertise in the MLS whether or not they would be paying?
Absolutely. That is correct.
They're not allowed to anymore.
They're not allowed to put it in the MLS anymore. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
the only difference will be a longer research to figure out what.
Yeah.
And so let me bring up something that often comes up with buyers. And let me tell you guys, if you're here watching, feel free to put your comments in here, and your questions or comments, and we'll answer them if we can. But something that often comes up is that that realtors steer our clients away from properties if the listing agent is not paying, a fee or a high enough fee. And I just want to say that is not true. Okay. Our agreement, in order to put in right now, it's in order to go under contract as representing a buyer, we have to have an agency agreement with the buyer. That agency agreement spells out how much the buyer is responsible to pay us. So when they sign that agreement, they're saying we charge 2.5%. You're responsible to pay us that 2.5%. But in many cases, the listing agent will pay it. And so the buyer reasonably wants to know, is the listing agent paying this or not? Because let's say you've got a property in the MLS, you're a seller, you've got a property in the MLS, it's listed at $500,000, and you are not paying the buyer's agent commission. Somebody else, the next door neighbor, has a property listed for $500,000 and they are paying the buyer's agent commission. Well, your property just went up by $12,000. So if your property is now $12,000 more bottom line to the buyer, it changes the value of the property. And so the buyers want to know that it's our responsibility to tell them that this is going to cost more money. It's not like we're, trying to being greedy or anything like that. We just want to be paid for our work.
And I think buyers too, I mean, they're thinking about all this too. So with the amount of inventory that, and if they see two houses that they like exactly the same, and one house is requiring them to pay a commission and the other isn't, I promise they're going to go with the other one every time. So I think a lot of sellers aren't really understanding the benefit of paying a realtor to bring those clients there amongst all the inventory and a lot of options. So
yeah. So, and this is another good point. Right now in the Triangle area, we only have, I think it's 3 towns. So it's Cary, Morrisville, Chapel Hill, and I think possibly Apex that are getting multiple offers. Well, actually, Liam, you're probably what is the multiple offer feeling like outright right now? I'm always looking at backwards data, so I'm looking at stuff that closed in the last 2 or 3 weeks and the percentage of multiple offers. But what does it look like out there right now?
Yeah, for me, I would say that you were pretty spot on right there with kind of the North Raleigh, Cary, Apex, Morrisville area is pretty competitive. I think there's a lot of houses too that are overpriced right now where they are going to sit and it won't have multiple offers. But as far as the houses that are priced correctly, I think it's pretty competitive. You're seeing multiple offers. That being said, outside those areas, so areas like Wake Forest, Wendell, Clayton, those areas that are really popular, they're really close to Raleigh. There's a lot of interest there. A lot of those houses don't have multiple offers, and it's houses we're going under ask on that have only been on the market even for a couple days. But whether they're overpriced or there's a lack of competition, I think buyers definitely have options.
Right, and that's the point. If buyers have options, they're going to go with the other options. The other question is, could sellers all just boycott paying agents? If something like that happened, then you might be able to get rid of it, but everybody would have to agree to do it at the same time. It would have to, because as long as there are other options for buyers, it's a competition thing. It's is your house going to cost me more than this house? And it just kind of, buyers just make those decisions, financial decisions for themselves. Okay. Yeah. The one other thing that I don't have written in the slides is this settlement also made it illegal for a realtor to show a property to a buyer that didn't have a signed buyer's agency agreement with commission already determined in there. So if we don't have a, like it used to be, and actually I think this is good and bad. I think it's good because I will be completely frank with what's happening. And one of the reasons that commissions might be as high as they are, we spend an awful lot of time showing properties to people who don't buy a home. And we only have so many hours in the day. And so if we're showing properties to people and they're not buying a home, we're getting paid 0 on those. And then we get paid on the other one. So if we have to show fewer properties in order to make a commission, maybe we can charge a little bit less. But as long as we're working the way we are right now, we cannot charge less. We cannot. We are all working as many hours as we possibly can. And it certainly would not work with lower commissions.
So there's a lot of trust that goes both ways. I mean, all the amount of time we spend driving around with people who haven't even sometimes made up their mind whether or not they're even buying in the first place, I think is a little bit lost. I think there's a lot of trust that goes back and forth too. So, like you said, there's pros and cons of this. I think that it's nice being upfront that, both parties are committed and we're on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, I think the downside for buyers in that is I have always, like, I'll say probably 90% of the buyers that come to us trust us, want to work with us, and aren't interviewing any other agents. But there's always 1 or 2 that they want to get to know us a little bit, and that's perfectly reasonable. And in the past, what we would do is we'd show them a few properties, and as you're walking through the properties, they're like, oh, these people know what they're doing. I'm getting all kinds of valuable information as we're touring the home. I think this is a good fit. And we won't be able to do that anymore. You'll have to sign a buyer's agency agreement.
Right. And just so as we talk about, well, who are the winners and losers in this agreement? I mean, this is kind of a big hit to a buyer. If a buyer can't actually look at a house with an agent without signing with that agent before they even go in the house, then everything that you were talking about, the ability to interview and to do a couple of showings kind of gets prohibited to the buyer, and they can't do that anymore. So they're
Because,
kind of losing something.
You can always make the term short. You can say it's just for today, it's just for this property. But what happens if you go into that property and you're like, I don't like this agent. I don't want to buy, I don't trust them enough to buy this property with them. I don't think they're going to be good, going through to the end. I mean, of course, people don't think that about us, but there's certainly people out there that you would feel like that about, and you don't have the ability to back out of that. Like you still, I mean, like you've got an agreement. If you want to buy that house, you have to do it with that agent. I think that's terribly unfair. I do. I think it's terribly unfair unless they're willing to give you, break that agreement with you and give you a documented, signed agreement that you are not held to it. But anyway, so, okay. Just to kind of sum up what everything for lots of people jumping on now. So this lawsuit is basically saying that, the seller, so NAR cannot require a seller to offer compensation to a buyer's agent. The listing agent cannot use the MLS to communicate an offer of compensation, but the seller can offer a compensation. It has to be in writing, and the agent can communicate it, but it just can't be communicated on the MLS. So the agent can communicate it on their own website, but not in the MLS. But the default is that the buyer is responsible for paying their agent the commission. So that's kind of the down and, the short of it. I wanted to talk about the trickle down effects before. Like I said, I've got some MLS data here, but I want to talk about that later when we address some of the things that some of the news has been saying, just to kind of debunk it. But the trickle down effects of the change, are sellers really going to stop paying buyer fees? What do you guys think?
I think it's going to be tough. I think definitely people are going to experiment at first. I think anything that saves people money, it's interesting and sometimes worth a shot. But I think that once people see how smooth transactions can be when you have two professional representatives that are, have experience and are setting expectations and managing emotion, there's a lot of factors that I think come into this that people don't necessarily realize before they're in the thick of things in the battle with their buyer's agent looking for their dream house. And I think as things start to change and maybe buyers go with somebody less experienced because they're willing to cut some money off, but then something happens and they're not represented well enough during negotiations or due diligence or inspections. I think there's just a lot of risks that until it actually happens, people aren't going to really know about. So I think it's going to take a little time. There's going to be some adjustments on both our end and buyer's end. Just again, interesting to see where it all falls.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that this is tested, right? I think that buyer's agents' fees are going to be tested. The value of a buyer's agent is going to be tested. This is going to be a bit of an experiment in the market to see, where things shake out. Could it be possible if, buyer's agents are getting paid? And again, for those of you that may have just joined, I should have changed my title at the bottom there. I'm a lender, so I don't do, I'm almost a third party here. I do on the lending side, but as far as the realtors go, if it's 2.4, 2.5% that a buyer's agent typically is paid, I think that's just going to be tested. I think we're going to have a bit of an experiment to see where it shakes out. And the value of a buyer's agent, I think, is going to, oh, thanks, Tim.
I did that. I hope I spelled your last name right. Did I spell Kelly right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, you did.
I thought it had two E's.
I was going to ask you too. I didn't want to stop the video at any point.
No, it's fine.
So anyway, yeah, I think it shakes out in the end. And I think that, will some sellers try and not do it? I'm sure. I think that these agents are going to prove their worth, and I think people are going to learn a hard lesson. Ryan Serhant was on, whether it was CSNBC or something recently, and he used kind of an age-old adage. I talk about it a lot, just in that experience and quality work is expensive, but bad service costs a fortune. If you hire somebody just because they're super cheap, you're going to have problems. And in the long run, that sort of thing is going to sort itself out. And I think ultimately it gets kind of settled in the long run.
Yeah.
Haven't there been experiments with trying to lower the prices? Aren't there already discount brokerages? Aren't there places that already have tried to lower the price and they haven't caught on? So why?
Yeah, no, they absolutely have. So my thought on this is, there's of course Redfin. Redfin is kind of probably the largest known discount brokerage. I don't know that, I don't know how to, they discount fees back to the client. One of the problems they have had is finding agents that I read an article actually maybe 6 months ago that they were having trouble recruiting agents for what they could pay. And the problem is real estate, we don't talk about this a lot. Real estate is an incredibly stressful business. You are dealing with people in the most stressful period of their lives. And I mean, obviously there are things more stressful than buying and selling a home, but buying and selling a home is pretty stressful. You're packing up everything you own, you're moving across the country, across the state, across the town, whatever it is. You don't know where your stuff is. Your kids aren't sleeping because their schedules are all messed up. You're not eating properly. You're spending a fortune in money, and it's extremely stressful. And so a lot of what we do is helping people make decisions when they're in a period of stress. And one of the ways that can look like, here's a great example of that. This happens all the time. Buyers will get under contract, they'll get their inspection back, and they'll look at their inspection and they'll be like, this is horrible, I want to terminate the contract. Now, we've seen hundreds of inspections. And so we can look at that inspection and we can say, okay, what we sometimes do tell people that inspection's horrible. Actually, usually we tell them before they buy the house. But usually what we'll tell them is that inspection is pretty typical for a house like this in this price range. Or we've had cases where we've told people that's like the cleanest inspection I've ever seen. And if you terminate this contract, you're going to buy another house and probably the inspection will be worse because this one looks really good. Or we'll tell them, look, this looks pretty normal. Or if it looks really bad, we'll tell them it looks really bad. But for example, I've told people that the inspection or when we're walking through a house, we've told people, this house is going to have a lot of stuff on the inspection. It's in rough shape. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. We usually pick up on that before they go under contract and try and help people steer away from it if they're not wanting a fixer-upper like that. So we usually don't get under contract and get horrible inspections unless the buyer's expecting it. But anyway, people will make decisions and they're under a lot of stress. So they see that inspection and they're nervous about it. And they got $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is on the line with their deposits. And they want to terminate and lose that money because they're worried about the inspection. We're there to kind of help them think rationally about it and decide if that is actually a good decision that's in their best interest. We can't alleviate all of the risk. I mean, there's definitely always risk in a real estate transaction. We can't get rid of all of it, but we can help buyers see things a little more clearly when it's a difficult decision. Liam, do you have any other thought? I know you've probably got 100 examples. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say something interesting to think about too, just the experience of how many houses we do see and walk through and get the inspections, is that we're constantly with builders, whether it's new construction or GCs, with walking through and doing quotes, whether it's before they close or even after they close, just recommending vendors for floors or paint or anything. It's kind of cool that we're able to not only see the price, but we also know the market on the flip side. So if we're walking into a house, we have the expertise to tell the buyer, hey, you might have, $12,000 of work here to bring this up to code or to make this safer. But the good news is in the next year, appreciation is going to be this, which will outweigh the amount of work done. So I think there's a lot of different avenues of our expertise and how walking through a house, even like Ellen said, our recommendation before you put the purchase in is sometimes I'll walk in and I'll say, this house is in rough shape. Like, I don't want to see you get into it. Like Ellen said, this inspection is probably going to be quite large. So, there's both sides of that, but I think it's really beneficial to just have somebody that's been through those exact situations. I mean, last week we had something interesting come up with a septic, and not really luckily, but a couple months ago, we actually had the exact same situation. So being able to tell the seller exactly what we did, who we talked to in the county, it just really sped everything up. And I think gives a lot of peace of mind to the buyer that, it is a really big investment. It's sometimes the most expensive thing somebody buys in their entire life. So I think more peace of mind possible going in, the better. So
can you think of examples? I'm interested in particularly in that emotional component and how difficult it is for people to make, because we really are your sounding board. You know what I mean? Can you think of things? And I also want you to talk about your parents. This might be a great place to talk about your parents and their purchase. And let me just preface this by saying, so Liam's parents bought a home recently, and are you okay talking about this?
Yeah, definitely.
You
yeah,
are okay. Okay. I don't know. I don't want your parents to be like, why are you talking about us on YouTube?
No, I'd be thrilled.
Okay. So he helped his parents buy a house just a handful of months ago, and he was surprised by how hard of an emotional, how hard these situations were emotionally for them, as even keel as they are. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so I've joked about that in the past, just kind of giving examples, and I bring up even myself too. I represented myself as a buyer when I bought my house, and it's funny to think back to that transaction, even though I've sold tons of houses before that, and constantly doing therapy sessions with my clients and explaining through emotions and all that. When it's you on the line spending the money, it's a different feeling. It's much more emotional. There's a lot more on the line. It's hard to control the emotion. So like Ellen said, even my parents, who I see as such level-headed, logical people, just a lot of ideas come up, and you start wondering, what are the sellers thinking? Are they trying to screw me over? I think a lot more negativity comes into it when there's a pressure situation too. And obviously everybody's going to react different. Even some investors who don't even have personal interest in living in the house or anything like that. It's still a very emotional process. So I think having somebody there to kind of, I think setting expectations, especially, and just saying, hey, we're going to ask for this in due diligence, expect this is the first answer, but there's plenty of room to go. Expectations, I think, are really big, but it's crazy the emotion that comes up, and for good reason. I mean, it's a big investment and important decision. So I think it's definitely good to have somebody there in your corner to help you take a breath and set expectations about everything.
Yeah, so we've got a comment here. Janachin, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but says, I bought my first home in July 2022. As a first-time home buyer, I probably would not have purchased a home when I did. Because of my agent's help, I was even able to get down payment assistance. That's awesome. That's wonderful. I love to see first-time buyers actually be able to buy a home when they didn't think they could. That's exciting.
Well, and that comment kind of highlights, what I see in a lot of cases. I usually don't talk to a buyer until after they've talked to a realtor about their options. And when I'm talking to realtors, I'm usually trying to educate them a little bit on financing. And so, again, another value that a buyer's agent brings to the table is they're aware of things, just like this person was saying in the comments about first-time homebuyer programs. I always find on the finance side, people always have all kinds of conceptions about what they can afford, what they need to do, how much money they need. Like one of the most common things, most people think that you need 20% down to be able to even buy a house. But just like in North Carolina, we have down payment assistance programs that allow people to close on homes if you fit the criteria for thousands of dollars, a couple thousand.
And I think a big benefit too of working with us is that we know people like Brandon, and a lot of people ask me, like, we don't get any concessions for recommending Brandon. We've just worked with a lot of these vendors, whether it's lenders or attorneys. There's obviously a lot of people in each trade. So having worked with us and being able to refer you to a person that we trust and can call anytime and communicate with explanations or whatever that might be without being pushed and sold to, I think is a big benefit for sellers. Just be more efficient with your time, and again, peace of mind, just to know that you're in trusted hands and we know this person and they're reputable.
Yeah, I don't want the rest of this to be all telling everybody how wonderful we are. So we're going to take it easy on that. I have some other stuff I want to talk about it, but I also want to say here, Patricio wants to know, will there be a minimum duration for the buyer's agent agreement if a buyer has to sign on one before starting looking at houses? You can set that for any time. 24 hours is probably the minimum. I'd have to look at the contract again, but I think you can also do it per property. So you could say just for this property or something like that. Or you could do it for like a day or whatever. But again, like the limitation with that is if you wanted to buy that house with the person, the person who showed you the property and you didn't like that person, you're now in a contract with them. You can't buy it with another agent unless they're willing to let you out of that contract. So that's the limitation of that. I think, again, good pros and cons to it. Pros that people maybe will be a little bit more, we probably will show fewer properties to people that aren't actually serious about buying a house. And I think that's important for us because we only have 24 hours in a day, just like everybody else. And if we're working for people that aren't buying, then it costs everybody more. So anyway, thanks for that question, Patricio. Let me address a couple other things. So the trickle down effect, I wanted to really think about what it could really look like if sellers did stop actually paying the buyer's agent commission. Like if there was no buyer's agent commission coming from the sellers, how could that shake out? Like, a couple different things. NAR suggested that buyers might actually have work it into their lending. Brandon, what do you think of that?
Well, I guess to address overarching, to repeat, I don't think this really ever gets to that point. I don't think it becomes commonplace that buyers are actually paying for the realtor fees themselves. But, they would have to pay that in addition to their cash to close, in addition to, their closing costs that are already set out. So you can't roll that into the value of the home. We have appraisals. The home has to appraise. And so another, percentage or two on top for what you would pay a realtor wouldn't shake out an appraisal. So buyers would have to bring this to the table on top of the money that they need to close on the home.
So what would that look like? So I guess the two things, one, they would pay for it themselves and either pay cash for it or they'd roll it into their lending. Or the other thing is they would not use an agent. Jonathan says, as a first-time buyer, I would not have bought my home in 2022 without a buyer's agent. There was just too much I didn't know, e.g. down payment assistant programs. And I'm sure lots of other things as well. But so those are the different ways. Like if the listing agents weren't paying it, they could pay it in their lending, they could finance it potentially. You don't think that would work? That's not going to happen.
I don't think that would happen. I just don't think that there's a way. I think it would have to come out, and that's why I don't really see. Another reason that I think this would be very difficult is that, you can't roll it into the value of the house. The appraisal's not going to support it, and the bank's only going to lend to what the home appraises for. So this would have to be something on top of the expenses that they're already paying in cash to close, like all of their closing costs, their down payment. They would then have to come up with that in addition to the way the market is right now. I mean, it's been tough for buyers,
Yeah.
and in some sense, you could definitely look at this and say, it's already it's already bad enough. Like it's already hard enough for a lot of people to afford being able to purchase. Imagine throwing this on top of it. But truthfully, for all the other reasons that we've already discussed, I just don't think, maybe in some situations, here in Raleigh, we're seeing a lot of homes that are getting a lot of offers again. If that trend were to continue, maybe on some homes that are really hot, maybe the sellers decide, and in addition, we're not paying buyer's fees, maybe that could happen. I think it would be very unlikely, but I don't know of, nothing's come out on my end about any changes that would be made in lending to account for this. I think it's very unlikely. They've set guidelines and tolerances where they are right now for buyers. They would have to drastically change those to fit this in. So,
and it's interesting too to think about those more competitive areas that are getting more offers. They talk a lot about redlining and kind of guiding your buyers out of neighborhood. But for me, for example, if I have a first-time home buyer that's right on the edge of cash down, it's going to make areas like Cary just absolutely unaffordable for them, because if they can't barely afford to buy the house without having to pay the agent's commission, and then that's the case because it's a competitive market, well, then all of a sudden that crop of buyers is going to be much, for example, more cash positive buyers that have a little bit more to put down, versus an area that's a little bit less competitive is going to get a lot more of those first-time home buyers, since it's not a competitive offer situation.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about the potential to not have buyer's agents, because many people might not be aware of this, but we have been there before. So back in the 1980s, there were no buyer's agents. There were only listing agents. Every agent represented the seller. And so if you would go into a realtor's office for some reason, or you wanted to see a listing, somebody might show you that listing that wasn't the listing agent, but they all worked for the same firm. And so they all worked for the seller. And so buyer's agency actually came about as a result of lawsuits back then against the sellers and the listing firms, because buyers felt they were not being treated fairly. So think about like when you go into like an apartment complex or a rental community or something like that. People come out, they show you the properties, they work for the leasing company. They are not working trying to get, good things for you. They're trying to get the property leased. They're trying to get in the best interests of the leasing company. And that, if we didn't have buyer's agents, that would be what it would go back to. So people would go to make offers and they would be like, well, what offer should we make? Or how much, should we put for a deposit, or how much for due diligence? And what does the seller have to do? Are they going to do any repairs? All these questions, like, they don't, as long as they're not lying to you and as long as they're not hiding anything, they don't have to tell you anything. So, all of this stuff, you would be in the dark and you wouldn't really know, how to proceed. And like I said, we've been here before. The situation that we have now was born out of the need for buyers to have their own representation. It's very much like, the court system, how we appoint a public defender to people, because it's not fair to go to court if you can't afford somebody to represent you. It's not fair to have to go to court against somebody that's trained to, to negotiate, to have to do that yourself. And so that's exactly why we came up with buyer's agents.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of those negotiations too comes from pushing the seller's obligations legally. So if they're violating something in a contract, you're going to need to know all those 27 pages of the contract and what the seller violated and how hard you can push on those violations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can negotiate on price all you want and say you're a good negotiator, but until you have that contract memorized and the market really understood, it's going to be very tough to have any leverage in negotiations.
Can we talk about this deal, Liam? It's not closed yet, but the one where there was the unpermitted work?
Yeah.
Is it okay to talk about publicly right now, even though they're not closed?
With not much detail or names or address, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a buyer under contract right now. And when Liam toured the house with them, I'm going to let you tell it, but you noticed that there was some work that had been done in the house, and you were like, I don't think this has been permitted. Just tell that story, how that went.
Yeah, so it's something we talked about. Permits are tough because you need to track down, through the county where they are, and sometimes there's question just because there's different areas the records can be saved. This house in particular was a recent renovation, so I always tell my clients when we're walking through those, this is just something that we need to definitely take a look at the work and make sure it's professionally done. Coming from doing GC work myself, I know a lot about the code, at least when we're walking through, so I can give an idea on that. But unfortunately, sometimes until inspections, it's really tough to tell. So for example, this one, the crawl space wasn't big enough for anybody to get under. So it's not something we could have seen. But after inspections, we found out from a camera going in there that it was not to code. So the house basically was being listed as a 4-bedroom house, 4 permitted bedrooms, but there was only 3 permitted bedrooms. So a lot of that came down to a specific portion in the contract, it's number 8H, where it basically says if there's unpermitted work, then the buyer has the right to get their due diligence back and walk away from the transaction. So without kind of knowing that exact section in the contract, somebody might be negotiating for those permitting costs, but the sellers could just say, no, we don't want to pay for that, and that would be it. But when you know to go kind of to that line and push them because they're legally obligated to represent the house accurately, definitely changes the situation a lot.
So in that instance, Liam, I mean, it's like insurance. Like it's really necessary when you need it. You may not always need it, and the value may not always be super apparent on every transaction. But when the wrong situation happens, you're going to be really glad you had it.
But
Yeah.
my point was that the buyers probably wouldn't have known without their own representative. They wouldn't have known about this stuff. They wouldn't have even known to ask. Right. And interesting, the people that are selling the house, I don't know if they didn't have representation, but they were not aware that there were not permits pulled for this work.
Mm-hmm.
Which
is again why it's important to have good representation.
Why it's important to have good representation.
Yep.
So Gordon says a buyer. Oh, I think we already put this up. Buyer does not have impartial. Buyer's agent is a foolish shopper. I agree. But okay. So again, I wanted to think about the different potential, and I agree, Brandon. I don't think it's likely that much will come of this. I do think people will try some different options, and sellers will give it a try to see if they can get away with not paying a buyer's agent and still be able to sell their house, and still have buyers come to their house. But I still think it's a good exercise to think through different ways that this could look. They could pay cash at closing. It's not going to appraise more than likely for enough to pay to roll it into their closing fees. We talked about not having buyer's agent. Oh, what could that look like if they didn't have buyer's agents? So I think one of the things that buyer's agents do is they make this a very fast process. If you have to call the listing agent, however many people want to look at a property have to all go call the listing agent, and the listing agent has to figure out how to coordinate that. Maybe the listing agent would say, all right, we're going to have an open house and everybody can see it from Saturday from 9 to 12. And that's when everybody's going to get to look at it and make your decision. Can you imagine as a buyer walking into that, like going into
no, I can't.
I'll give you an example, because I've actually in my career only done one transaction that did not have a buyer's agent, and I was terrified. In fact, I was very hesitant to even spend my time working on helping them on the financing, because step one, so this did happen to me, and I did have to think through and saw what happened when you don't have a buyer's agent. So the first thing was, the question was, well, how do you know what this house is worth? How do you know that just because it's listed at that price, if it will appraise? So I had to try and give them some direction on figuring out, well, how would you know if this is going to appraise? That's really something that a buyer's agent handles. And so,
they're going to go to other professionals and ask for that information
without paying them. Yeah. Other agents. Yeah. No, I guess, but yes, they would have to go to other professionals. And then secondarily, so assume then that they don't have a buyer's agent, and maybe they make an offer on a house that they can't, it doesn't appraise. And let's say that they offer, say, $700,000 on a home, and it appraises for $675,000 because they don't have representation that helps ensure that they're paying the right price. So let's say they do that. Well, then they would have to cover an appraisal gap. And if, like in that case, that would be an additional $25,000 to cover the difference between where it appraised and what they offered. And if they cannot afford to do that, one thing in this state that is very common is due diligence. People pay due diligence on the front end. It's essentially, and you guys could do a better job explaining, but a commitment to the offer that has a guaranteed amount of money.
It buys you the right to inspect the property.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, so they would lose that money if it does not appraise and they don't have the money to cover the appraisal gap. Then the seller has the right to terminate the contract and take their due diligence. So
they can renegotiate. They can renegotiate. We would renegotiate the price, but if they weren't with an agent, they could try and renegotiate the price.
And if they didn't accept, but what happens if they don't accept that?
Then yes, the only thing to do is terminate if they won't accept it.
And they then have the right to walk with the due diligence, or
correct,
earnest money if you got that far.
Yeah.
For me too, something to think about too. If I'm listing a house and I have two different offers, and one's a really good broker that I've worked with before, and I know is going to make the transaction efficient and smooth, and set expectations and handle emotions, and then there's an offer where it's an unrepresented buyer who maybe it's a first-time home buyer and they don't know anything about the home buying process. That's a pretty clear-cut choice for me. I'm going to go with the one that I know will close and is going to be smooth and efficient.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about some of the claims made by the media. Is there anything that we didn't cover? Does anybody have any questions about how buyer's agency works or how fees work or anything like that? Well, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will answer them throughout this. I wanted to go through claims made by the media and kind of talk about which ones are real, which ones are false. Okay, this is from NBC. The new rules should lead to commissions falling 25 to 50%, which we view as benefiting online real estate brokers, Seberg wrote. But he warned it's too early to declare the end of local real estate agents, given their local expertise and reputation in neighborhoods. It's why we do not see this following the travel agency model in which online eclipsed local offices. So some people are thinking, like, what do we need real estate agents for? Can't everything just be done electronically? I mean, if you think through that process, of, an app, even Zillow probably has something like that. You can just make the offer. I don't know if they do or not, but they probably do. You can just make an offer right there. But the question is, I've had this happen too before. I had somebody ask me if I would represent them for $2,000, and I said no. And they're like, we already found the house. You don't have to show us any homes. And I was like, honestly, the under contract part is the most stressful part. You know what I mean? Showing houses is
showing's fun.
Yeah, showing's fun. But once you get under contract, that's when the real work starts. So I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do it for that. And they went ahead and went under contract, and they got their inspection back. And she's like, "Can you please help me? I don't know what to do with this. It's overwhelming, and I need help negotiating it." And I was like, "You're already under contract, and you've already agreed to not pay an agent, and you don't have. I mean, I can't help you at this point because you're contractually obligated to do it the way it is." But what was my point? So like the idea that you can just make an offer through an app. You just put your offer into the app. This is how much I'm making for my offer. This is how much for the due diligence deposit. This is how much for the earnest money deposit. But then there are so many decisions you have to make along the way. And you really want somebody to ask those questions. So who is going to be that person that you ask the questions? Well, somebody might say AI. Like, could an AI bot be trained? I was just talking with another agent about this today, actually. And I think it's a really good, legitimate question, because I am a huge proponent of AI. I love ChatGPT. I talk to him. We call him Chuck in our house. We talk to Chuck about everything. I now talk to Chuck before I go to the doctor about something. I want to know what Chuck has to think. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. And I think AI can do a really good job of advising people on all kinds of things, if it's possible to train the AI with some kind of documentation. So a friend and I were talking about this today. I think it'll be a lot easier for a bot to take over and provide attorney advisement, because laws are black and white. There are books. You can train the AI on the attorney, like on every law that there is, and they can know exactly how every single thing has played out in court, how things have been interpreted, and they might even do a better job than an attorney. Honestly, they're seeing that AI is able to do a better job. They're training AI on certain things like seeing tumors and things like that in CAT scans, and they're actually predicting certain things or diagnosing, not predicting, but diagnosing certain things with greater efficiency than like doctors do, in certain things. I mean, it's not like everything yet. So I do actually believe in the power of AI, and believe in the power of AI to actually drive down prices. So I want to start by saying that. The problem is AI cannot walk through the house with you and notice things as you walk through the house and help you eliminate houses that aren't a good fit. AI cannot, the conversations that we have behind the scenes with all of our buyers, in order to train AI on that, we would have to take all of those conversations, write them down, and train the bot on how they, what we discussed, how we discussed it, what the outcome was, what people, how people responded to it. There's no easy way to train an AI to be a real estate agent, because we operate in the in-between places. You know what I mean? We're not attorneys, so it's not about the black and white. Now, we are familiar with our the contracts that we use, the handful of contracts that we use. But it's mostly kind of dealing with people's perceptions of those things and helping them make good decisions. Sometimes it's rock and a hard place kind of decisions. Well, we don't control the situation, but we can tell you these are the three options that you have in this situation, and just dealing with those kinds of things. But the options that people have might be different based on what's important to them. You know what I mean? And so I just don't think AI is going to be easily trained to replace realtors. If it could be, it absolutely could drive down prices and replace realtors. And I would be all for that. Actually, I would be excited about that. It would mean I'd need to get a different line of work, and that's okay too, because I'm a proponent of AI, and I just think it allows us to do more creative work, and I'm okay with that. But
what about this idea that says that these new rules should lead to commissions falling 25 to 50%? Is that actually reasonable? I mean, one, how could it happen? Two, would that lead to an exodus of brokers?
Before we talk about that, let me put Patricia's question on here. I'm a first-time buyer, and I've signed an agreement with a realtor. Very glad I have representation. Do I have the right to know if they're getting commissions from home sellers? Absolutely. It's in your contract. If it's a North Carolina contract, which I don't know if you're in North Carolina or not, but if it's a North Carolina contract, it spells out how much you are paying for the commission. And then the realtor is required to tell you every single property that they show. They're required to tell you how much the seller is paying there too. So yes, in North Carolina. I don't know what it's like in other states. So
to give an example of that too, even if I, for example, was getting a kickback from Brandon for referring him, I would have to disclose that to my buyer based on the agency agreement.
yeah, we have to disclose everything.
To be very clear on the, for my bank's sake, no, that doesn't happen. But to your point, you would have to disclose.
Yeah. Timothy, put that back on the screen. We're going to talk about, that was a good question. No, not that. The question the quote from the 25 to 50%. The new rule should lead to commissions falling 25 to 50%. Is that going to happen? And what would that mean for the real estate industry?
Honestly, I can speak to here locally. Again, we discussed it earlier. If you weren't here on the live, for North Carolina, this doesn't really change anything. Again, I'm a lender, so I'm not on your side of the table, but it doesn't really change anything. They have the ability to not pay buyers, realtors commissions. This has kind of already been tested. It's kind of already been set by the market. I think this is going to test it. Does it have the potential? Because now all this conversation is going to come out, and people are going to be thinking about, do I need to be paying buyer's agents? But at the end of the day, I don't think here locally anything changes. Is it a possibility? Sure, it's a possibility, because now it brings that conversation to life.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think in the end of the day too, it is a market and it's a service. So if people are willing to pay for a realtor that's going to do a really good job for them and find them a home and make the entire transaction smooth and give you a lot of, peace of mind, I think people are going to pay for that. And if they don't want that and they're willing to take the risk, they won't pay for it. And unfortunately, I think some people are going to learn a hard lesson on that. But again, it's going to be to each his own if that service is worth it and if the smooth transaction is worth it to pay that fee.
Yeah. So the question really is, has the market actually played a part in what realtor commissions are right now, or has it not? So I pulled all this data earlier. I thought I'd share with you guys. So our MLS, as we've already said, our MLS, we do not require sellers to pay buyer commissions. They can say zero. They do not have to put it in there, and people do. So 0.3, I'm going to go through the different kind of groups of what sellers are offering buyers. 0.3% of sellers offer compensation from $0 to 1.9%. 8% of sellers offer a 2% commission. 1% of listings offer between 2.1 and 2.3%. 48% of listings offer 2.4%. 33% of listings offer 2.5%. 5% of listings offer 3% commission. 1% of listings offer a 4% commission, and 4% offer a flat fee, and that's anywhere from $3,000 to $19,000. And then another section was the $0, so 0.03 offered nothing at all. So this is already kind of all over the place, and I think what happens here a lot of times, now we do not tell people what to charge, but when people ask us, when you list a house, you say, what would you pay the buyer's agent? We say, we charge 2.4%. So if I were you, I would charge, we do that because that's what it costs us to do business. And so that seems a reasonable amount to offer a buyer's agent if that's what it costs them to do business. And so that's why a lot of people will offer 2.4%, because it's kind of the recommendation. They don't have to. They can say, can I charge just 2? Sure. Go ahead. Whatever you want to do, you can do that. And so this idea that it's going to drop 25 to 50%, if it were going to, why hasn't it already? It's already, we already have, like in some areas that apparently, if it wasn't the case that in some areas they required the sellers to actually offer a commission, this wouldn't be a lawsuit, because that's what the lawsuit says. But since we're already doing it that way, wouldn't that mean that prices would have already dropped, since we already allow them to do that?
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of this too has to do with the service you're getting. So, I mean, there's a lot of discount brokers that are willing to do it for 1%, but they're not going to stage your home or hire cleaners or do an open house or give you, price analysis. They're just going to put it up on MLS and hope for the best. So, I mean, there's still a negotiation of, sometimes people will come to us and say, like Ellen said before, I don't need you to do much, so will you do it for this? It's always a negotiation, and sometimes we do that.
Right. On the seller side, I would do it. On the seller side, I would absolutely charge less than the going rate. There's no going rate. There's everybody really does charge different. And the thing is, there's no going rate because I have no idea what everybody else charges. People say 6%. You've got all of these things saying that we charge 6%. That's not true. I know a few individual agents who've told me what they charge. Nobody charges 6% anymore, or hardly
Everything's
anybody does.
negotiable.
Everything's
in every
negotiable.
situation.
But
For sure.
I truly believe, we've talked a lot about buyer agency fees because we do a lot of buyers, and this is really kind of a buyer agency thing that they're talking about in these things. But I personally believe that listing agents do charge too much for what they do, for what I see that they do. I know a lot of listing agents, they do not provide staging for their listing fee. They're charging a 3% listing fee or somewhere around there, and they're not staging the listing for that. They're not doing anything. They give the buyer a checklist and say, here, you do everything. I'll come back when you're done. And in my mind, you're charging a lot of money, and all you're doing is showing up to take pictures and then sticking in the MLS when you're done. So I feel like there's a lot of either extra services that should be offered for the fee or reduced fees, one of the two.
Yeah. And when it comes back to that too, I mean, we're going to listing consultation showing the seller, if you do nothing to your house, this is what it can sell for. If you do a few items, this is what it can sell for. So, I mean, there's a lot of data to show that using a realtor will sometimes make you more money than you would have saved if you didn't use a realtor. So we're presenting all that data too. And to every seller, it's an option and a negotiation, just like we were saying. So if they want to go in the top level and make as much money as they can for their house, it's going to be X amount of commission.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
but they're the ones making that decision. They're making that decision. Do you want these services? Do you want these services? And sometimes people, some people keep their homes pristine and they don't need any help because it looks like a movie set when you walk in there and you're like, hey, you're good.
I've joked with people before that, oh, maybe you'll get a discount because I don't need to hire a cleaner company.
Seriously.
So seriously. If that's the case, I'm all for it.
Absolutely. 100%. Let's face it. Buyer's agents do the bulk of the work in this business.
Without a doubt.
Which is funny. It's funny that they're the ones potentially facing cuts here.
Absolutely. 100%.
And the buyers are struggling the most, and they're the ones that are facing some difficulty with the compensation as well.
It is really funny, isn't it? Yeah. And the listings and the sellers who won all of this money in this lawsuit, they all got, arguably, they probably all got free buyer consultation when they purchased their homes.
Yeah, especially in an area like Raleigh where it is so competitive. I mean, those areas like Cary, the sellers didn't need any more fuel to get as much money as they can for their houses.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's look at some of these other media claims. Yeah, and just to also say, if commissions did fall 25 to 50%, that would put a lot of buyer agents out of business, including ourselves. I do not think we could weather that.
It put a lot of buyers out of the market as well.
It would put a lot of buyers out of the market. It would put a lot of buyers agents out of the market. We could not do it for that price. There's no doubt about it. Okay.
Sellers will be disappointed when there's less competition.
Yeah. Okay. Holden Lewis, a home and mortgage expert at NerdWallet, warned of a potential negative trade-off. Buyer-seller negotiations will become more complex, and buyers with plenty of cash might navigate the process more easily than buyers who don't have a lot of savings. He said Seberg flagged a similar concern in his note, saying it could particularly affect first-time buyers with limited means to pay for an agent. Brandon, you said something about this earlier. Back when in 2021, 2022, when the market was crazy and people with money were able to go over list price and not worry about the appraisal, it would be exactly the same thing. People that didn't have a lot of cash would be priced out. And people that do would be able to buy houses.
And yeah, this kind of highlights like one of the ways that this could be viewed is just that, like we were saying before, there's already problems with first time home buyers and the average buyer, a lot of people not having a lot of cash that, I've noticed definitely running pre-approvals now, going through files, making sure that you are approved for the loan. It's a lot more difficult than it was when rates were lower because tolerances are really tight. Like a lot of people are like barely qualifying. Certainly a lot more than did before. So, there is definitely an argument to be made here about like, why of all times would you do this? Like why, there's already enough stacked against first time home buyers, the have-nots, so to speak, the people that don't have, tons of cash. It's already difficult enough because rates are high. Insurance just raised, at least here locally, that's getting higher. Taxes are being reassessed higher. So even as rates come down, there's still a lot of challenge there. So definitely one response that's pretty common here is like, really, we had enough of a challenge for first-time home buyers as is. Did we really need to stack this on top of it?
Yeah. It seems a lot.
Which again, with those first-time home buyers, the appraisal is going to be more important, and buyer representation will be more important to know that exact number for the appraisal.
Right. Yeah. And it's, yeah, I think a lot of people think they'll use Zillow or, you know, one of the online things, and just
That's
a lot of
scary.
times it is. I mean, Zillow is only accurate to, Timothy, what was it? 20% of theirs are accurate or something like that.
It was not a confidence inducing number.
Yeah.
There's a great video on this if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. So for decades, the National Association of Realtors has required home sale listing brokers to provide an offer of compensation to a buyer's agent upfront. This usually comes out to about 6% split between a seller's broker and a buyer's agent. This is what, I don't know. Oh, this is also NBC is saying this. But that model's come under intensifying scrutiny from critics who have likened it to a cartel. This is what they say about us. They say we're the cartel. I just find that absolutely unbelievable. I think people are just angry. I really, really do think it's a bit of scapegoating. Honestly, prices are high and everybody's angry about it. And we're angry too. I mean, it's affecting us too, believe it or not, in ways that you can't even imagine. Like we said earlier, we show a lot of homes to people that don't end up buying homes. It's more than it's ever been. I've been in real estate for 9 years. We do more of this now than we've ever done it before. We do a lot of free labor. And it's because of the way the market is. We don't like it. You know, it's not
We love an even market.
We would
hate when sellers have too much power. Yeah.
Yes.
Makes it tough.
Last year, a jury in a Kansas City federal court found the longstanding practice to be a form of collusion that artificially inflated real estate fees and awarded a massive $1.78 billion judgment against NAR. So again, that 6% fee, do people charge that? Does anybody anybody watching know if that's like a common thing where you are? Because it's not around here. And I just wonder where they get these things for these
Huge
articles.
fallacy, the 6%.
It's a big fallacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea that there's collusion, because try and get a realtor to tell you how much they charge. Try. Like, as another realtor, they won't tell us. They don't want people to know. One, they probably want us to think they're charging more than they actually are. But these are things that realtors don't talk. Collusion requires people talking about things and saying, we're going to set the price at this. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Nobody does it. It's a no to talk about. Liam, have you ever talked to another agent about what they charge? Has anybody?
I have not. No, I agree. I mean, when people ask me, I want everybody to think that I'm getting the 6% too. So
yeah,
yeah,
maybe that's what it is. Maybe everybody's saying they charge 6% and nobody gets it.
That's why everybody thinks that.
That's what it is.
Telling bold-faced lies.
That's funny.
Actually, I charge 7.
I mean, I think what's interesting here too, in the way that was written, essentially suggesting collusion and like negotiated, say, between firms, that would suggest that in most real estate firms that like there's a top down. Firms are generally fairly loose from my experience. I'm able to see an outside and work closely with different realtors at different firms. So it's not like a corporate setup typically. It's realtors are entrepreneurs.
We're self-employed. We don't work
Yeah, you do
for
what
them.
you want. Right. So the mentality of collusion or suggesting that like different firms all colluded and all realtors that work for them were all doing the same thing and there's like some level of control. You can barely control if you own a firm, like you are going to struggle to try and like control what your realtors are doing.
Crazy. No one, we don't do what people tell us.
It's just an interesting quote.
And I mean, we're competitors too, and we're tribals fast. So if we're not competing for you and getting you the best deal, I mean, that's going to come out. For us, we're all about referrals. So if people aren't coming back to us after because we didn't do a great job for them, then we're going to be out of business pretty quickly. So I think there's a big misinterpretation of that we are competing for you, because if we don't, we're not going to get very many clients.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Okay, there's another one here that irked me. No longer will homeowners be required under NAR rules to offer compensation to buyer's agent. Michael Ketchmark, lead attorney for the plaintiffs in the case, told Kiplinger in an interview. The new rules will return the sale of homes to the free market and allow technology to benefit sellers of homes. I want to know what technology is going to drive buyers around a city, around 10 different counties, and walk into the houses with them and talk to them while they're. I mean, I don't understand this idea of technology making things cheaper, because
Yeah.
It seems
And
to me that, sorry, go ahead.
I just think there's so many different avenues for data. So, for example, the people who are saying, well, I can price my own house, I'll look at data on Zillow. All I can say for them is good luck with appraisals, because that data is so far off. I mean, we can't even say whether it's high or low or anything like that. Every house is so different. I mean, depending on the source, you could have a difference of $15,000. And if you're $15,000 short, that's money you have to come to the table with. Like Brendan was saying before, you're going to lose that due diligence.
Yeah. If we're talking about pricing shoes, then, it's a lot easier, but houses are all incredibly different, and coming up for a price requires a lot of skill, a lot of experience, and a lot of finesse.
And a good example of mine too is I bought my house a couple years ago and we flipped the entire inside of the house. So Zillow has an estimate of my house, how it sold 2 or 3 years ago when it looked like a house that just came from 1985. So they don't even know what's happened on the inside of my house. So just a small example of my house, if I'm looking at that as a comp, it's going to be literally $100,000 off. And as a buyer, especially if you're out of state and don't know the neighborhood, that's impossible for you to know the difference of.
Yeah, 100%.
When it comes to appraisals too, just one side point there, there's an entire industry of appraisers that has been created, and a lot of people employed and licensed to do appraisals because of the process that we have in place to verify the value of a home. So
hey,
go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I thought you were about.
It was just the thought that an app or something's about to come out and overnight, done, got it. That's settled.
A lot of money to trust on the advice of an app.
Yeah.
Well, there are already apps out there, and they're not accurate. That's the point. There are the technology that is out. There's already a lot of technology out there, and it hasn't been able to make prices lower because people don't understand that it's not the paperwork. And it's not the automated the things that are easy to automate. That's not what costs so much, and that's not what takes so much time.
And we're using that as realtors. We're using a lot of that technology where we are using AI or putting documents through systems that does make it more efficient for us. But simply doing that I agree, isn't going to change the price.
It's just such a small part of it. It's such a small part of the process that it doesn't really affect it that much.
Yeah. And most of the world's doing that electronically anyway. So it's not like it's a massive process change. That's just how things are.
Exactly.
I like this one.
All right.
Housing
Can you
experts
read it on the screen?
Yeah, I got it. Housing experts said the deal and housing experts said the deal. And these things are so poorly written, I can hardly read them sometimes. Housing experts said the deal and the expected savings. So now I'm starting to sound like when Timothy writes my scripts for me. I'm like, this is terrible. How do you expect me to say this? I'm getting a little slap happy here. Okay. Housing experts said the deal and the expected savings for homeowners could trigger one of the most significant jolts in the U.S. housing market in 100 years. This will blow up the market and force a new business model, said Norm Miller, a professor emeritus. I always say that wrong. Emeritus. Did I say it right, Timothy?
Yes.
Of real estate at the University of San Diego. So I looked up Norm Miller, and Norm Miller's never practiced real estate, but he's read a lot about it. So,
shocker.
What do you like about this quote?
I've got a take here. Oh, Tim, please come in.
No, go ahead. No,
I was just gonna say, just that. What I think this is going to do, because I've, again, if you're just tuning in, the sentiment I've had throughout this is that at least in our state, this is already here. They can already negotiate fees. I think that this shakes out to start a lot of conversation. I think a lot of sellers are now going to see, oh, maybe I don't have to pay buyer's fees. Maybe, inventory is a very big problem right now. It's one of the biggest problems that we have in this industry. There's just not a lot of homes on the market. I think that the positive light in this, and where they get it right in this quote, is that I think a lot of people do start to have the conversation and start to consider, should I sell my house? And they start to talk to realtors and they start to get information. And you know what? This actually could jolt the real estate industry and get some people that are sitting and holding their homes, maybe, back into the market and selling. I think that could be the case. I don't think it shakes out because this has some major all of a sudden buyer's agents don't ever make anything anymore. I don't think it has that kind of effect. But where I think it gets it right in this quote is that I do think people come into the market because of this.
Yeah.
And I think too, a lot more is going to come down to quality of how the job you do. So the realtors, I think, that might get out of the market are people that just know that they can't compete with other people that are willing to go above and beyond for their clients. So I think a lot of that's going to come down to the job you do and whether or not that's worth it for them.
Yeah, for sure. Timothy, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say either when I look at this, it either looks like incredible hyperbole, or it makes me very grateful to be in North Carolina, because as we've talked about, all of these changes that they're talking about in the settlement don't seem to really change the way we do real estate here.
Yeah, we're already
But
doing all of it. Yeah.
right. But if there are lots of places in the country that are not like this, and that these changes, which we've adopted decades ago, are going to be, implemented there, then maybe it does change some things significantly. I don't know what it's like in Iowa or Montana or Oklahoma, but it just makes me glad to be in real estate here, where things are fairly sane and reasonable, and there really isn't strong arming of people into doing things that they don't want to do.
If sellers really are required to pay a buyer's agent, that's awful. That's ridiculous. They should never be required to. It really should be, they do it because it helps them sell their property for what they want it to be sold for, or market dynamics should indicate whether or not that's something that they want to do, and they should make that decision, not the National Association of Realtors. I want to say something else about NAR. This idea that, in my mind, NAR is a monopoly, but we are their clients. Like Liam and I, we don't have any options of going anywhere. If we want to practice real estate, we have to be a member of the Association of Realtors. I do believe this is actually changing that, but effectively it doesn't matter because they own the MLS. The MLS is the only place where you can get all the data that you need and the information that you need to help your clients. So we have to be a member of NAR. I've always been bothered by that. I found that out when I got my license. I was like, oh, I don't want to join NAR. What do I need them for? They're like, oh, you have to. I'm like, what do you mean I have to? That's a lot of money. I don't want to spend all that money.
And it's a lot of the fees that people don't understand that we are paying too. We have MLS fees, association fees, license fees. There's a lot that goes into keeping our license active.
Yeah, and we don't get anything for it. I mean, we get the MLS, and another thing that people don't know is they just jacked up our MLS. They totally redeveloped everything, messed it all up. You can no longer do half the stuff you used to be able to. They were making it better, but now it's broken. I mean, it's broken. Yeah. Everything takes 10 times longer. Somebody needs to come along and develop something else like the MLS that realtors could also join and just say.
Yeah, you're saying that there's this is the there's potentially, or it's like the NFL and the XFL. You've got now a potential somebody to come in and rival NAR potentially if they can.
Someone should.
Like the MLS.
Someone should. Absolutely, somebody should, because we need competition. Because frankly, I feel like NAR is very dated. Like what they did to our MLS is because they didn't know to hire the right tech people to actually do a good job, or maybe it's just so old and archaic that you couldn't really fix it. You kind of have to start from scratch because it's, you know what I mean? It's just been there so long. I mean, it needs an overhaul. I mean, NAR needs a complete overhaul, and we need another company to come in and create some competition for us as agents, I think.
It would be interesting if that happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hire some developers and get to work.
I know, right? Yeah, I know, right?
Maybe I'll call you after. We'll get started.
All right. So the bottom line from Axios: most observers believe commissions will fall a lot, possibly to as low as 1 to 1.5 per agent on each side, says Steve Brobeck, a senior fellow at the Consumer Federation of America. Is this wishful thinking, or is there some possible way that this settlement could actually result in 1% commissions across the board?
I don't think so. I think that's I don't think even the worst buyer's agents could work for that. I mean, it's just, it takes too much time dealing with people. It's the dealing with people. It's not the technology. It's not submitting the offer. It's not any of that stuff. It's the holding people's hand. It's the saying, call me or text me. I've been texted by clients at 1 o'clock in the morning. Liam, how late have you? It's 1 o'clock.
All the time. All the time at 1 a.m. All the time.
Anxious. They're anxious. They want to talk to you about something. You're like, I'm here for you, man. It's
24/7.
Yeah. It's not the physical, submitting of offers and things. It's the dealing with the people, being there for them and helping them think through. I always tell people, if you just need to talk through something and you just need an ear, call me.
People apologize all the time. I say, vent to me all you want.
Yeah.
I'll filter it out and we'll make sure, set expectations, talk through everything, and you'll feel a lot better at the end.
Exactly. And that's exactly how it works. Yep.
All right. So what about, is it possible that these institutional buyers that everybody's been worried about buying up all the homes, does this give them some kind of added competitive advantage in the market?
That's a great question.
For me, I think if an institution's willing to pay, they're going to go get the best of the best to go out and get the house, the best deal they can, make it the most efficient transaction. So, and if they're not,
I disagree. They're not going to use a buyer's agent. They're their own agents. They're well trained. They're well trained in everything. They don't, they're not we don't know more than they do. They know more than we do. An institutional buyer, they know a lot more about the financials than we do. Absolutely. Why are you laughing, Brandon?
No, I'm just, you're right. Sorry. Just go on. Sorry.
Okay. No.
But no, and I'm thinking too, just in that, when it comes to, I think that on where this probably comes into play are in certain houses, in very competitive houses. I don't know how maybe a seller knows that ahead of time, that, I'm going to have 30, 40 offers, which has happened here in Raleigh on and did a lot in the 21-22 timeframe. But would they not have to make that decision prior to the listing? It remind me, Ellen, is that what it said earlier, that they would have to determine whether they would be paying buyer's agents or prior to putting it on the MLS?
So it says that the sellers have to have a signed agreement with the listing agent saying how much they're going to be paying the buyer's agent, and it cannot be put in the MLS. The compensation that they're offering the buyer's agent is not allowed to be put in the MLS.
But that would be determined prior to going live, right? Prior to putting it on the market.
Correct. Yes.
So I think that this could come into play in very competitive situations, that an institutional buyer with more cash, if in the middle of a listing, if a seller can say, I got 30 offers now, well, hey, I'm willing to pay. I'm not paying buyer's agents anymore. So only look at offers without, with no buyer's agents attached. I think that could be, where it would come into play. Mm-hmm. But I think it's probably not going to be something that they're going to know ahead of time, that they're going to have a very competitive house. You know what I'm saying? They'd have to determine that ahead of time.
Right.
It'd be hard.
Yeah. You might be right. I don't know.
Maybe I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's just hard to piece all the moving parts together, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure you're right.
Well, I think just the idea that an institutional investor or an institutional buyer, if there was widespread sellers refusing to offer buyers commissions, then an institutional buyer would have an advantage over the general public, because they can easily they're already eating the cost of that employee who is doing the buying for them. So it would give them, but I think only if all or the vast majority of sellers all decided not to offer buyer commissions, which is hard to see happening, because in most cases there appears to be a competitive advantage to actually offering a commission.
I was just going to say about what Brandon was saying a minute ago, that I don't think the market's going to get that hot until we see interest rates do something. And Brandon, I wanted to know, we weren't talking about this tonight, but what's the word on the street with interest rates? Are they ever going down? Last I heard, the Fed was talking about maybe not dropping much this year. What are you hearing?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it's gotten so busy in the past month
You're not
or
paying
two.
attention.
Like, it's been crazy. I mean, I've been trying to keep up with it. Surprisingly, we got an inflation report not long ago that was not as good as they kind of hoped. I mean, there's still probably two sides to the argument, because you can make the argument that we got jobs report in January and February that were very positive. And this is a trend, and this hasn't caught on. And I don't know if the Fed's going to catch on to this. The data, doesn't support as strong of jobs as we're being told. So every month, what's happening, and this has occurred almost all of last year, this continues to happen. We get a jobs report come out, and then later on we get revisions to the jobs report that say things like, it's the last jobs report that we got out in March showed a higher number than expectations, but for January and February, they revised the numbers that we had by a good 30 or so percent is the figure
that's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot. And we saw that a lot. And so part of the decision the Fed is making to keep rates high and not drop them has to do with good jobs reports. That's what they're basing it on. So eventually maybe they look back and they say, okay, the data that we thought about jobs wasn't as good. I still believe that long term, throughout the course of this year, eventually we start to see these come down. The Fed did put out projections anonymously in December that they expect rate to go down this year, next year, 2026, in the foreseeable future. So the Fed's projections, the people that are making the decision on the rate, when polled anonymously, showed that they expect rate to come down. That's been the strongest thing that I've kind of put most weight into. I think they start to come down. I don't know when. I'm thinking it has to be any day now, but the market kind of slowly is just hanging out and goes up a little bit, down a little bit, but it's hanging in that high 6s, low 7s range.
It's a lot of demand for as high as rates are. I think if they go down, I think if they get in the 5s, it'll be crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I know you guys are similar. I mean, this has been very busy, and I was hoping all last year we'd see rates drop, but there's been so many people entering the market, even with higher rates.
Even with rates, yeah.
If I had lower rates right now, as much as I might like that, it's very busy as is.
Yeah, they'd be hiring people back into the mortgage industry if that happened.
yeah. So yes, it's very hectic without them. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I'm out of Timothy. Do we have any more quotes? I think we're done with our quotes.
We have quotes, but I think we've covered the content of most of them because everybody was just saying the same thing.
Yeah. We still got a lot of people watching. Anybody have any questions before we jump off? I don't think anybody has questions. Going once, going twice. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. I think it was a lot of fun. It was good. It was kind of cathartic, honestly, to just talk through it all. It's been very emotional for all of us in the real estate world. Like everything that came out on Friday. I said this at the beginning. I'm sure there's nobody still watching from the beginning, but I saw the news on Friday and I was devastated. I was completely floored. Like they're just going to gut the real estate market. They're going to gut the entire industry. But it really turned out that most of what was being said in these things were just simply not true. So
my initial reaction similarly was very, I had that take of like, it's tough enough. Like, do we really need to tack this onto it? People are already struggling to get homes. But as this is carried out, I more and more feel, really, and I can only kind of base off what I see here in, the Triangle area, but I more and more feel like this is just going to be a little bit of a shakeup. I don't think much is going to change here. And truthfully, the more that comes out, I do think that this is probably a positive. We've got to get more inventory. We've got to get more sellers in the market. I think this is honestly maybe a good tool to start a lot of those conversations and get people into the market that are holding their homes.
Yeah, makes sense. Liam, do you have any final thoughts? Or
I was just going to say, I know there's a lot going on and a lot of confusion. So if anybody out there has questions, always here to chat and talk shop.
Yeah, absolutely. Our numbers are on the website. You can grab us there. But all right, everybody have a great evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Thank you, guys.
Night.